Now, the military tacticians amongst you will know that fighting a war based on the premise of it's fine, they probably won't shoot back isn't the most sound strategy, and it was not. Is there an afterlife? Why are we here? And why is Belarus a thing? From 1952 onwards, Mongolia was ruled by a man called Yumjaglin Sedambal. Look, I'm not even going to pretend that pronunciation was any good. Which is firmly and entirely not within the region of Guinea. If you're on one side of this line, you're in the Netherlands with its fancy windmills. If you're on the other, you're in Belgium with its convenient access for German armoured divisions. Winged Hussars? Polish. The Liberum Veto? Polish. Getting carved up by your Russian and German speaking neighbours? Polish. As you'll probably know, the invasion went really well, then less well, then pretty badly. That the Western leadership would get very drunk or something and say yes. Spain suffered more difficulties when the heavily disabled and airless Charles II died in 1700. Britain was left standing alone. Well, sort of alone. Alone in the sense of it was only Britain and all of its empire remaining in the fight. Barring one because, well, only when the Swedish people were overwhelmingly against military action that they backed down. But Russia had to pass Germany, Denmark, the United Kingdom, the other United Kingdom and France. Used Arya, Iran or Iranshah to refer to it, which means of the Aryans, the name given to the people who lived there and not, you know, those other guys. British interests there would be protected. I mean, because if you can buy Alaska, why not Greenland? The Danish said no. And that royal family stayed in power until, you know, a thing happened. You see, before this, the US had briefly occupied Veracruz in 1914 after a diplomatic incident, and there was little doubt that they could do it again, but for the whole country. Food, shelter, Jesus, gold and boats. Rhodesia had very few friends, barring some unofficial support from Portugal, hence the oil imports, and South Africa because, obviously. It's a nation with extremely high levels of poverty, one whose government is barely existent, and notably it's a country racked with violence. Britain was a nation of nations who were all equal. Theoretically at least. In practice, not so much. There was one exception. A pound was made up of 20 shillings, which in turn was made up of 12 pennies, and a penny was comprised of 4 farthings. And as such, Churchill pushed for a 5th member. France. Turns out the sidelines were just fine. On the one hand, France had just lost a thing which would never not be funny. On the other hand, sheer panic. And again, Charles de Gaulle vetoed it. 5 years of poor exile crippled the Dutch ability to maintain a colonial foothold. He could have it. He. Not Belgium. He. And so, when Franz Ferdinand visited Sarajevo to try his hand at being assassinated, it wasn't long until World War I was well on its way, pushing for things like self-determination. In Europe, that is, not the rest of the world, nobody asked them. De Gaulle's primary reason for not wanting Britain to join was gone and he vetoed them again. But this trial didn't have time for silly little things like evidence and lawyers and was frankly little more than a sham. In a verdict that shocked everyone, the couple were found guilty and sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in custody. Which was literally 5 minutes because they were actually sentenced to death, which was to be carried out immediately. So Tsar Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Best Dad Ever, the Vatican was placed under siege and the Pope made it clear that whoever ordered the assault on the city would be excommunicated. Which the Italians got around by finding a Jewish soldier and getting him to do it instead because you can't excommunicate someone who isn't Christian. Alongside I promise I don't want any more of Czechoslovakia and I'll be home soon, sweetie. And given that to everybody alive ever, even Dave, they're known as the Spanish flu. Although if you were found guilty of being a witch, you'd be tortured and killed. And Napoleon, now the Emperor of France, had plans to reforge Europe in France's image and interests. He asked why he would entrust his body to a doctor, his horses to an Avenel, but not his soul and virtuous well-being to a philosopher. A fair point perhaps, but it ended with Epictetus getting punched in the face and no patron. So to force the issue, in 1930 Turkey passed a new postal law which forbid the postal service from delivering letters addressed to Constantinople. And this worked, which is why most nations officially refer to the city as Istanbul now. Except for the Greeks. Germany could also sell gold that it had acquired, and realising a trial would take time or something, just shot it. Now, the role of the BEF, not that one, the British, whom the Portuguese had been allies with since 1373, and thus it could only be good news. Just kidding, the message was an ultimatum. Or at least they would have, had Stalin not made one tactical blunder. He forgot the sky existed. Plan 1 was for a US-backed invasion from the south, whereby rebels would depart from Nicaragua and seize Trinidad. The Cuban city, that is, not the island. And the British plan was simple. Blow it up. Turns out that's quite hard, and so the British moved to Plan B. Give up. The second reason was that Pétain enjoyed international recognition as the legitimate ruler of France, with some exceptions. The plan was to make staying there as difficult as possible. Its emperor, Franz Joseph, yes, he lived that long, also getting the pilots drunk so they wouldn't think too much about the whole dying thing. A person would say or do something to insult another, and the insulted party would demand satisfaction. Satisfaction being either an apology or a duel. When de Witt went to visit him, he was ambushed and killed by a mob, and said mob subsequently ate him and his brother. Not all of them, that would be uncouth, but they did cook and eat some of them. But Mao wasn't interested in safety. Mao was interested in proceeding. So as of 1938, Europe was a pretty tense place. A potential future may be promise of one day prospectively becoming citizens. Perhaps. The deal was finalised in 1990 and it remained in effect for 18 months before the USSR collapsed and Pepsi had to start negotiations all over again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my patrons, Kelly Moneymaker and Izzy. A declaration of police action just doesn't have the same ring to it.